Windrush Farm Story Time. The Surprise. Hi, my name is Mike, and I have to tell you about this kid George at my horse camp this summer. There isn't usually much that surprises me, but this kid really did. Surprised me, there were 6 of us there that week to learn about horses and gardening and stuff. It was pretty cool. I live in the city in Lawrence, and I don't really get out of the country much. I go to visit my gran in Winthrop, but that's on the ocean, and it's not really the country. Well, we helped take care of the horses and learned how to ride them some. I like that part the best. And we worked in the garden, which I thought I was going to hate, but we got to pick stuff and eat it, and I even liked the lettuce. That was another thing that surprised me. Oh, there were some chickens too, and we got to collect eggs and take some home. Chickens are really stupid. That is not what I want to tell you, though. It's about George. He was one of the kids there that week. There was also Julia and Yolanda. They came together, and yuck, did they giggle and whisper a lot. They're from Methuen, which is another city near Lawrence. Jose was also from Lawrence. He thinks he's a big comedian, and he's always telling these lame jokes. And there was Raul, who's this really cool kid, also from Lawrence, but not in my school. He's really tall, and he knows all these karate moves and ninja stuff, and he has a scar on his eyebrow, which he says is from a knife fight. I don't know, maybe. And then, as I started to say, there was George. And I mean to tell you, what a weird piece of work I thought to myself when I first met him. He's tall and ultra-thin, and his skin is very white. He does not stand up straight, like his bones don't really hold him up. His arms and hands hang down, and his fingers twitch a lot. Yep, they wiggle around. His face is long and thin, too, and his eyes are big and black and absolutely do not see you. His hair, as you may have guessed, is sort of long, hangs in his eyes, and he's always brushing it back. But the way he looks was not the problem. George was just plain out of it. He always looked like he was somewhere else. His eyes looked into outer space or something. He tripped over stuff, sometimes even fell down over something because he wasn't looking where he was going. Our counselor, Marie, would go, "George, pay attention. Look where you're going. You're going to hurt yourself or someone else." And George would always go, "Huh? What? Oh, sorry, what?" Like he wasn't really there at all. The first day we went on a tour of the farm, checking out all the places where we would be doing stuff, seeing where the garden was and going to the barn to see the horses. Well, at the garden, Marie said, "Guys, here's where we'll be weeding the veggies and watering them and picking our lunch." We all stopped to look, but guess what? George just kept walking. Right in the garden, into the dirt, and stepped on some of the plants. We all yelled, "Hey, George, watch out!" George looked up all of a sudden, looked around, and went, "Oh, whoops, sorry," and turned around and stepped on some big vine, got his foot caught in it, tripped, and fell on the plant. "Oh, George," cried Marie, "where are you? What are you doing?" "I don't know. I wasn't looking. I just tripped. What's this?" "It's a zucchini plant." Well, it was. Marie did not sound happy. But George didn't notice. He leaned over and picked up the piece of vine that had broken off and was turning it over in his hands and looking at it like he was studying it or something. "It's very graceful," he said. Well, yeah, whatever. It was also very broken. But he went on looking at it and turning it around and holding it up. "Come on, George," said Marie. "We need to go on to the barn now. And George, watch where you're walking." "Oh, sure," said George, still looking at his piece of vine. At the barn, Marie told us to walk slowly, not to yell or startle the horses. There were 6 stalls on each side. Some of them were empty because those horses were turned out into the field, but in several stalls there were horse faces looking out. Marie started to tell us about each horse as we came to it. It was really interesting, and I saw one brown guy with a friendly face that I hoped I'd get to ride. Julia and Yolanda kept saying, "Aw, so cute," and wanted to pat each one. Marie showed us how to approach a horse or pony. Lots of these guys were ponies, and we tried it. Raul wanted to know if we were going to gallop on them, and Jose told us a couple of lame horse jokes, LOL. Now you're wondering, I bet, where was George? Yep, got it in one. Not with us. George had wandered down to the end of the barn and was standing in front of a big black horse and just staring at it. Of course, the horse was staring back. "Don't try to pet him, George," said Marie. "That's Dragon, our director's horse. And you need to get to know him before you—" "He's a thoroughbred, isn't he?" said George, stroking the long black nose softly. "Yes," said Marie. "How did you know that, George?" "By looking," said George. And he turned to us, his long face looking very much alive for once. You see, he took a step down the side of the stall, did not see the manure fork leaning there, stepped on it, and whack, it sprang up and banged him on the forehead. "Ow," said George. "Oh dear," said Marie. "Are you all right, George?" George looked surprised, rubbed his forehead. "Yeah, sure," he said. "I do that a lot." He did this sort of small smile. The girls giggled, and Julia whispered something to Yolanda. Well, that was the barn tour. We looked at all the horses, and 2 other times had to find George. And once he told us that the big tan pony in the stall was called something like a half-finger. Marie said yes, that was Judge, and asked him again how he knew. But George didn't hear her because he had wandered off again. Well, now you get the idea of what George was like. The kind of weird things he said and did. The rest of the day was kind of the same. He messed up when we went to work in the garden and pulled up the lettuces instead of weeds. He sat on the carrots and stared with this really out-of-it look on his face at the 2 horses in the field next to the garden. Raul and Jose started to tease him a lot. Raul set some booby traps for him, like a tiger trap. You know what those are. You dig a hole, theirs wasn't very deep, but a foot, and then you cover it with weeds and stuff so the person can't see it. Then they called George to come see something, and sure enough, he fell right in the trap. "Oh, whoops," he said. And Raul and Jose shouted with laughter, and the girls giggled. I wasn't sure if I wanted to laugh or not. There was a mystery about George, and I was getting interested in finding out what it was, so I just watched him a lot. We started working with the horses right away from the first day. We each got a horse or pony. I got Woody and learned how to groom them. Fun, and put on the saddles and bridles. I'm not good at that. The first day we went down to the indoor arena and practiced leading them. One of the girls got stepped on and cried. Then we were allowed to get on for a little bit. That was really cool. George forgot to tighten the girth under his saddle, so when he tried to get on, the saddle slid around the side of the horse and he fell off. You know what he said? "Oh, whoops." Marie was mad, but the others laughed, and George just got up and fixed his girth, patted his horse, said something to it, and got back on again. I wondered what he was feeling like. That was super embarrassing, but I couldn't tell by watching him. I was puzzled by George. If it had been me, I'd have used a lot of words I'm not supposed to say. The mystery continued when Art Lady came to give us drawing lessons. She gave us all big paper and pencils and colored chalk if we wanted it. The girls were all happy and wanted to draw the pony like candy. Art Lady spent a lot of time with them telling them how to do it. More giggling. I personally really can't draw, so just decided to draw the barn because it's basically a box with a roof. And I spent a long time coloring it in. Art Lady was not real impressed. Raul and Jose goofed off mostly, told jokes, and drew stick figures of girls they knew that stuck out in front a lot. They showed the girls who, guess what, giggled wildly. Then Art Lady went over to George. He was drawing in his journal notebook that Marie had given each of us for writing down our impressions of camp, the horses, and other activities. But George said he would draw in his. I thought, I wonder why. When Art Lady got to George's place at the table, he flipped his notebook upside down and said very clearly to Art Lady, "Thanks, but I don't like anyone to see my work until I'm finished." Art Lady looked really surprised and kind of annoyed. "Well, George, that's your name? I could give you some suggestions. Maybe I could help." George looked at her and said, "No, thanks. I'll just keep on doing what I'm doing." Said Art Lady. "Yeah, really said that, like in a snort. Well, have it your way, young man, but I'm here to help." George didn't say anything and went on drawing. "Okay, weird," I say. I was really curious now. Well, the week went on pretty much like I've described. Barn chores, riding. We learned how to post with trotting. Well, I did, and the other 2 boys. The girls just bounced and giggled, and George stood up in his stirrups when his horse trotted, so he didn't bounce. But Marie got cross and said that was not the right attitude and that he should try to post. And George said sadly, "I've tried, Marie, but I just bounce." So Marie taught him how to do jumping position, leaning forward. We all learned it, and George smiled like he was really relieved. George tried to help in the garden. I think he would forget what he was doing and sit down with his basket and look over the field at the horses. When he did this, his fingers sometimes twitched a lot. This bothered me, and I wondered why they did that. I'd then pick up some lettuce for him so he could have it with the rest of us for lunch. He always smiled at me sort of vaguely and said, "Oh, thanks, Mike." Thursday, I think it was our next to last day, Marie told us that on Friday we would have a special day. She would drive us all in the pony cart, and we would have a sort of horse show to show what we had learned in riding. Everyone would pick some veggies to take home, and then at lunch we'd all share what we had written in our notebook journals and what we had drawn. Whoa! I felt sort of nervous and excited to finally see what George had drawn in his notebook. I mean, I was sort of scared it would be really awful and all the others would just laugh. I don't know why I didn't feel like laughing. I usually don't like lame-type kids, but there was just something about George that was, well, really interesting, and I couldn't wait to see what was in that notebook. Friday morning, Tina hitched up Squash to the pony cart, and we all went driving around the farm. It was sort of fun, but I was too impatient about seeing George's drawings or writing or whatever to care a whole lot. Then we had the horse show, which was really dumb because it was like a toddler birthday party where everyone has to get a prize or they cry. My only prize was for the fastest emergency dismount. Raul won the best riding award, hands down, because he really has gotten to be good and he's proud of it. And as you can guess, Julia and Yolanda won the best groomed ponies. They had to put little bows in their ponies' manes. Jose won a prize for the best trick, which was riding backwards while singing a song. And George got the prize for most improved. Well, he really had improved from where he was on the first day. Finally, it was time for lunch and our sharing and our writing and drawing. I could hardly eat my sandwich. I kept looking at George. He didn't seem excited or nervous. He just ate his lunch and got out his notebook. Of course, Yolanda and Julia wanted to go first. They had written a story about a princess and her pony and drawn some pictures of the princess and her pony. Don't ask me to say anything more about it. There was a lot of pink in the pictures. We all clapped for them a little. Raul read something from his journal about learning to be a super rider and how he was like being a super karate person. And well, I didn't really listen. I was getting nervous. Jose's journal said what he did every day, one activity at a time, with a picture of a horse in the garden, our place where we eat lunch. It was not funny, which surprised me, just long. Then it was my turn, so everyone said, and I decided to read my first day's journal, and that's all. I just said about what I told you about the first day, and I ended up saying that I really wanted to learn more about what we were doing, and mostly about the people in our group. And did you? Asked Marie. Oh yeah, I said, but not everything I wanted, yet. Isn't it George's turn now? Yes, answered Marie. George, are you going to show us what you've been doing in your journal this week? She looked kind of unsure about whether he would or not. I held my breath. George looked around at us and smiled. Sure, he said in a clear voice, not mumbly or real quiet. Come on over here, round where I'm sitting, he said, and I'll show you. George was sitting by himself on a bench at one of the little picnic tables. The rest of us got up and went over there, and George pointed out that each kid could sit so they could see. The counselors got up too and came and stood around behind us. George opened his journal and spread it out flat so there were 2 pages to see. I like to draw graphic comics, said George. My favorite animals have always been horses, so I learned a lot about them, and I watched them so I could draw them in my graphic comic stories. We all looked down at the 2 pages on the table. I could hardly believe what I saw. On the left-hand side of the page was a drawing of a horse, the coolest horse I've ever seen. He was rearing, and his front legs were pawing in the air. He was drawn in pencil, which was gray, and the horse was partly had pencil on its mane and body, so he looked silver. His eyes flashed, and it looked like the tail was slashing around. He looked absolutely real. On the right-hand page, in large letters, it said, "Silver Stallion to the rescue." Under it was a small drawing of a horse's head, the same horse that was on the first page, just like it. Silver Stallion is part thoroughbred, part Arabian, George said. Look at his diamond-shaped head, his long, thin legs. He's made to be powerful and fast. This is a graphic comic that I drew to tell his story. I like to make graphic comics so people can see what I'm telling about. Nobody said a word. We were all staring down at George's horse. Finally, Raul whispered, "Whoa," and Jose muttered, "Yeah." For once, the girls were silent. So were Marie and the other counselors. "Okay," said George, "now I'll show you the story. This is how the Silver Stallion and his master saved some horses at Windrush Farm." He turned the page, and just like any comic book, there were rows of little drawings of horses and people with little balloons over them with the words. There were 3 rows of 3 pictures on each page, and each drawing made everything look absolutely real. "Oh, wow," I said softly. "Oh, wow." Silver Stallion, George began, pointing to the first picture, was resting in a field eating grass when his master, that's him there in the next picture, he often helps the police. He got the message asking for help. Thieves, they said, were planning to steal 4 of Windrush Farm's nicest horses. He had drawn the 4 horses in their stalls looking out. It was the middle of the night where they were, so Silver Stallion's master knew they would have to move fast. "Come on, Silver," he shouted. "We need to get to Windrush Farm to save those horses." There was a picture of a boy, who obviously was George, jumping onto the stallion's back. Then there were 3 pictures of them racing along through woods and down roads, and then a picture of the barn at Windrush Farm. Written underneath in a line were the words saying what they were doing. There then followed pictures showing the 3 thieves creeping up on the barn with the big horse trailer behind them, waiting at the foot of the drive to take the stolen horses away. Then there was a picture of the horses inside smelling them and starting to whinny, the thieves getting the barn door open. Beside me, Raoul sighed, "This is so cool. I can't see how I can draw like that." "George, how long have you been making graphic comics?" asked Marie. "Oh, for ages," said George, his eyes fixed on the front of him. "Now here comes the exciting part. On the next page were pictures of the silver stallion arriving at the barn, surprising the thieves who were just letting out the 4 horses. There was a picture of them huddled fearfully by the barn door, then a picture of the silver stallion rearing up, front legs slashing out. The thieves were crouched down underneath him, looking terrified. "Oh, yay!" I yelled. "Go, silver stallion!" George looked over at me and smiled. "Yeah," he said, "this is the best part." The next page showed the boy jumping down, running down to the house to get the barn manager and his helper, Silver Stallion, continuing to rear over the thieves or stamping at them, and when one tried to get away, grabbing him by the back of his pants and shaking him. "Yay!" we all yelled. The last 2 pages showed the barn manager and his helper tying up the men and thanking the boy and Silver Stallion for rescuing their horses. And then, "This is my signature line," said George, and as the boy and the horses head off down the drive, he called to them, "You'll always be safe when the Silver Stallion is on the job." We all clapped and cheered, and when I turned around I saw, get this, Marie wiping her eyes and smiling this great big smile. "Oh, George," she said, "we all had no idea." George got all red, but answered right out, "Well, I don't talk about it to people. They think it's weird. Well, I'm weird anyway. I get thinking about stuff and I want to draw or a story about Silver Stallion. I guess I tune out or something." Marie smiled. "Yes, George, you do, George, but you're not weird. Especially now we understand why," said Marie. "You're a very talented young man." "Hey, man," said Raoul, "we're all weird. I mean, I do all this karate, kung fu stuff, and it's kind of weird. And Jose and his jokes, that's pretty weird." Jose made a face and hit Raoul on the arm. And of course, the 2 girls just stared adoringly at George and giggled. I couldn't think what to do at all for a minute. I just stood there. But then I knew what I needed to do. I stuck out my hand to George. "Congratulations, George," I said. "You are the best." George looked at me and he got red again. "Thanks," he said, shaking my hand hard. "Thanks, Mike." And he grinned. Yeah, not just a smile, a big grin. So that was the whole story of the surprise I started to tell you about. Pretty cool, huh?